All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, all right. Welcome here to Wild West Hackin' Fest, the 2 p.m. slot. If you're looking for the guy with the red beard named Bo Bullock, he's actually teaching over in track 1, giving his presentation on hacking the cloud and cloud calendaring. So if you're looking for that, leave. If you're looking for this, good news, you're in the right place. Let's find a domain's worth of malware. If you want to read more about me, read the slides later. This talk is strategic. Fair warning, a lot of talks here are doing great things. I love the content we've seen so far. A lot of them are focused on what to do for the next few months, quarters, years, trends in the business, or soft skills. Those are very important, but that's not what this is. This is about going from you have very few detective controls to having lots of detective controls in just a few weeks. Just to set expectations, there's a few forward-thinking pieces towards the end, but for the most part, this is how to go from 0 to not 0 very quickly. All right, so I want to go over 3 different ways to find malware in your environment for free in the next week or so. As a consultant, I have absolutely gone in and implemented 1 or more of these in any 1 week given period. Granted, if you're internally focused, it's hard to spend 40 hours on just one thing and ignore all meetings. That's the consultant life. On the downside, I tend to fly over to less interesting places sometimes. So first up, we're going to talk about Google Rapid Response for finding persistent executables inside your environment, as well as a little bonus on OS query there. Second, we're going to look at using RITA, so Real Intelligence Threat Analytics, by, well, Black Hills Information Security, for searching for beaconing behavior, right? Higher up this pyramid of pain we'll be discussing. And finally, we'll talk about a little forward thinking, looking for unique SSL client and server fingerprints using JA3. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Threat modeling is damn important. A lot of people don't spend nearly enough time on what are they trying to prevent or detect as far as attacks go. So the 3 major scenarios we're going to be dealing with are persistent malware that is not caught by AV, which, spoilers, there's a whole rant on AV at some point in your life that I'll try to give you. Some of you have already experienced that one. It happens. There are things that are caught by AV, but not your AV. And certainly there are things that are malicious, but aren't flagged as by AV for whatever reason. All right? We can also talk about living off the land, good old LOL BAS, living off the land binaries and scripts being used to phone home. So this might be Microsoft signed binaries. It is entirely possible to go through an entire attack campaign without taking advantage of flaws. Well, patchable vulnerabilities. It's entirely possible to complete a threat actors campaign by taking advantage of features and only features. How do you find them, right? If AV and EDR pointing to the bad is your main way of finding bad, how do you find it when it's legit software, right? How do you find people using remote desktop to pivot from machine to machine, right? It gets a little bit harder. And the final issue is shadow IT, as we all say, right? People installing like TeamViewer on their machine and have another way into your environment, or exfiltrating data using things like Dropbox or Drive or Box.com, OneDrive, etc. All right, finding anomalous information. My favorite type of signature is not, this is known bad. You found it, it's bad, right? Copyright Benjamin Delpy is the example I always give for, if you see that in an EXE, it's probably a bad sign. In that sense, if you make that your signature, you get a lot of true positives and very few false positives. However, copyright Benjamin Delpy does not affect the execution of mimikatz.exe, so searching for that is a very brittle signature. My favorite type of signatures are things that aren't looking for known bad, only true positives, but instead looking for odd behavior. Things that are more indicative of what attackers tend to do. So looking for odd behavior that's worthy of further investigation. You're accepting some risk of false positives, but that's okay because it's a detective control, not a preventative control. Let's block it every single time, right? And at the bottom here, I harp on this a lot. Attackers behave fundamentally different than regular users in your environment. Regular users don't open command prompts and type whoami/groups very often, or do a dir listing of the domain controller C-share just to see if they have domain admin, right? Pen testers in the room, how many times do you do exactly that to see if your golden ticket worked, right? Or you do pass the hash of a domain admin. Let's double check that I have domain admin rights by doing directory listing of domain controller. Little telltales like that are really good signatures. You accept some false positives, but you investigate why people are running binaries like that. All right. I love the pyramid of pain, right? The idea is that lower down in this pyramid of pain, things like hash values or IP addresses or domain names are really, really easy to have an attacker swap them out, right? Side note, what does most threat intel feed? Hash values, IP addresses, and domain names. For the most part, side note, you are paying for other people's already burned infrastructure. It's probably not going to be used much more. But threat intelligence that you gain about a particular adversary is very valuable. Threat intelligence that you've gathered is very valuable. Threat intelligence that you purchase is not. So we'll look at a few of these items. I think every single talk now has to have some attack matrix slide, and it's for a damn good reason. We now have a common language to describe different attacker techniques. And this is the official attack enterprise matrix, but I wanted to bring it up in a different light. That's how defenders think of the attack matrix. In this view right here, we have the different categories. Like the third one is persistence, and we have things like account manipulation or browser extensions or creating a new backdoor account. But here's the way I like you to think about it from an attacker's perspective. The attacker has to play Minesweeper. By the time they've landed on a box, they've already clicked once. The problem with Minesweeper from the attacker's perspective is you don't know when you've tripped a detective control. If they have really good detections for, I don't know, sticky keys as a backdoor to be able to move laterally inside the environment, if you don't know what mine came up. You don't know how many mines there are. So think of the columns and rows as being those different attack matrix techniques. You don't know how many mines there are, but you need to accomplish your goal choosing techniques in the different categories, hopefully without being caught as the attacker perspective, right? But you have to play. Time is ticking. Eventually, right, defenders will notice something that you've done, hopefully, right? The mean time to detection, average dwell time, according to M-Trends, is something like 78 days. So we're less than 3 months, but for the record, there's plenty of pen test and red team engagements that accomplish their goal in much less than 3 months in a row. All right, one more shout out here for deceptive techniques. Right? A deceptive technique like adding a run as/net only credential on most domain joined boxes, so that when attackers run Mimikatz, hopefully you're detecting that itself. But even if you aren't, if they do a bad attempt to log in with the credentials they stole from memory, they've now alerted you, oh, this account is locked out. It didn't really have domain admin rights, or maybe it did, but it was just not allowed to log in anywhere, and its login time was no hours whatsoever. Right, so they tried to log in, they failed, and at the worst case, you know, well, where that failed authentication came from, and you know where they are, and can start that pivoting process of finding out, okay, how did that box get infected? What was the calling process ID, et cetera, right? Or outside vendor passwords.docx. Right? Anything that gives them away, it makes not only the attacker, it gives you more detective controls, but also it makes the attacker very, very hesitant to believe the things they see going forward. That's the thing that I don't think comes up nearly as often that makes me very happy as a defender. Right? If I can convince the attacker that passwords.txt on a user's desktop isn't real and they shouldn't use those passwords because they've been burned by deceptive techniques before, by some honeypot, sweet. That gives me more time to respond. Oh, and there's a link. By the way, I'll have all these slides, the link at the very end, and there's a link to Matt Toussaint's talk on the offensive defender, which is full of some great stuff to deal with as well. All right, some people look at the attack matrix, and it's really easy to get very quickly overwhelmed, right? There's well over 200 different techniques to deal with. How many do you think you have coverage for right now? Less than 10%? Less than 5%? A lot of organizations have AV and centralized logs that they can't really make heads or tails of. So that's not much in any of those techniques. Getting some coverage, right? You don't have to play Minesweep. Remember, the attacker has to do many, many things, many different techniques in order to land on a box, elevate their privileges, move laterally, find their goal if their goal is to exfiltrate data, successfully stage and exfil that data. And any one of those goals, sub-goals, if you will, they have to incorporate multiple techniques. They have to click Minesweeper a lot. 100% coverage is nice, but let's be like, there was a tweet 4 hours ago from MITRE saying they've updated the enterprise techniques like for October and added a good 15 or so. Right? These things change over time. 100% does not mean 100% coverage. There is nothing an attacker can do that won't get them caught. All right. First technique we want to talk about, first tool I want to discuss is Google Rapid Response. Google Rapid Response is an incident response framework focused on remote live forensics. All right? For those who came from the forensics realm, memory forensics means that a lot of attacks are plain as day. You can't really hide once you're executing in memory. Right? But people say, no way is someone going to randomly go to that box and like dump memory and then search through it for the bad. Unless you have ongoing hunts to find the bad that are actually using memory forensics in a nice, scalable way without overloading your boxes. All right, so installing Girth is really easy. They have server builds for, it builds installers for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, 32 and 64-bit that automatically point back. You just have to run the executable as administrator, and then Girth is installed. It's easy. It's free. It adds significant attack coverage. I did Girth first because it's the easiest one to get deployed and go from 0 to about half of the attack matrix coverage of some kind. That's a lot of coverage. That's about 50% more than most organizations have. 50%. Right? So another good piece of news, there's OS query integration. I'll have some more slides on OS query, but as of May of this year, Girth can run OS query queries as well just by having osquery.exe loaded anywhere on the Girth client, which you can also push out via group policy. So you can do threat hunting in near real time because OS query is SQL syntax for boxes with OS query installed. It's going to be difficult to read, but in the lower right it says select name, comma, path, comma, process ID from processes where they're not on disk. Oh, sweet. In-memory only binaries on Linux boxes is a technique, and it's a thing to be concerned about, or at least it's an odd behavior that's worthy of further investigation, which again is my favorite type of signature. All right, so here we have SQL syntax. It's a little easier to read. Select star from registry, where key is like blah, 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 image file execution options, and name equal debugger. That double % means anything. If you set debugging options for an image file, this is how the sticky keys backdoor works. They've added a debugger called cmd.exe that runs every time the sticky keys binary runs. So they now remote desktop, which brings up that GUI if you don't have network layer authentication going on. They press shift 5 times, and a command prompt running the system appears. How many people right now know that you have coverage for sticky keys in your environment? I saw a hand. Wait, 2 hands. How many people know that an attacker last week used sticky keys against you in particular? All right, there's a class last week where the attacker in class used sticky keys and could still move laterally inside the environment if they had access to port 3389. So the interval means this runs once per hour on every domain join box. It turns out checking a registry key in the background is not a high CPU task. You can safely run this every hour, and there are many more like it, right? So this is under the technique of accessibility features, T1015, and they give the monitor registry keys at this path as the example. This is the attack the attack technique itself that we're talking about here. All right, so there's one example of mapping as many attack techniques as possible to OS query, which is in the slide notes, by the way. I just couldn't fit it on the slide. That covers 79 Windows techniques and 69 additional Linux techniques, total of 148 different attacks techniques. There are 266 known ones. So you can double check my math, but that's greater than 50% coverage just with OS query. Available for free and just have it phone home to whatever SIM you already have, or just use Girth and troll through the bad and investigate, add exceptions as necessary. And as a reminder, you don't have to have 100% coverage in order to capture even or detect even very advanced attackers. Here we have at the bottom, this is from Microsoft Kill Chain, not Cyber Kill Chain trademark. It's different, right? So we have from the user clicking on the link or opening an attachment to installing to C2, persistence, privilege escalation, reconnaissance, lateral movement, accessing shared resources. This is at the very least, an attacker will have to choose about a dozen techniques, though they can choose somewhat per category. And if I have 50% coverage, that's like, well, all things being equal, guessing a coin 12 times in a row, or 2 to the 12th power, which is 4096. That's much better odds on the defender side than on the attacker side. I hope you can agree there. All right, how do you actually install Girth? Because I wanted to make this, again, you can hit the ground running with this. It's really easy. You just have to run the executable and have the DNS name and outbound web connectivity available to the Girth server. So I came from the Active Directory, came from Windows World. So let's get really specific. The easiest install by far is group policy. Make 2 group policies, one for 32-bit Windows machines, one for 64-bit Windows machines. Make 2 WMI filters, one for 32-bit, one for 64-bit. Don't cross those streams. Have the WMI filter saying that link to the domain root. If it's a 32-bit system, run this binary. If it's a 64-bit system, run this binary, the 64-bit version. That's it. Now, Microsoft might push back a little and say software deployment via group policy is not recommended because if you do thousands of WMI filters and thousands of group policy objects linked to the domain head, you can start to have some problems. I agree. This WMI filter is evaluated once upon boot. I'm not terribly worried about that. So I have the little caveat. If you have a lot of endpoints, like over 10,000, just to get a rough idea, maybe over 50,000, if you have some other really reliable way to deploy software, like SCCM or ZenWorks or whatever, then maybe you should use that instead. But I will argue, for those who have worked in like package deployment, that you don't have perfect deployment of your SCCM agent, and therefore there's going to be some boxes you'll miss getting Girth installed. And that's a problem, to be sure, but it's not usually a problem IT security can fix. Group policy will pretty much always work if your domain is working. That's why I like going with that. All right. So I wanted to talk about the title of this talk, Finding a Domain's Worth of Malware. All right. There's a built-in hunt called Collect Run Key Binaries. It downloads all of the binaries that are automatically started on your Windows domain-joined workstations that you installed Girth upon. And then look through those binaries. A good place to start, look, we could talk about not uploading to VirusTotal, but for most organizations, I would strongly argue that you're better off with you also having visibility into what malware is your environment, as opposed to just the attackers knowing where their malware is inside your environment. So when you upload to VirusTotal, every AV company gets a copy of that binary, as well as people who pay, essentially Google, the owners of VirusTotal, a lot of money. That's probably still worth it. I think the intelligence gained is worth that trade-off. All right? So VirusTotal API said I wanted to go through all of it. All right? So there's a VirusTotal binary. You can get, it's a Python precompiled binary that uses VirusTotal API. The free API allows 4 requests per minute. I mean, you couldn't do all of your binaries all at once, but I argue even for the environments with 100,000 endpoints, you don't have that many unique binaries. 5,760 requests per day, that's a lot of executables to work through in one day, let alone 1 week getting it through math, over 30,000, 35,000, 38,000, something like that, binaries, unique executables. That's pretty good, right? So getting feedback on how many of those were flagged, and once you have, this is flagged by an AV that isn't yours, begin incident response process as necessary, right? So file scan, point to each file name, but by the way, I have the find command that will run each one of, run VirusTotal scan against each one of the files that you've mentioned and save out the results. You can search through it later as well. That's the title of this talk, right? Finding a domain's worth of, well, automatically persistent malware. There's other stuff in here as well, but I wanted to actually deliver on the title here. All right. There is something called Velociraptor as well. So if you want to evaluate Velociraptor by Mike Cohen, it's also a recent alternative to Google Rapid Response. And yes, Alyssa Torres told me about this one kind of the last minute. So I had to put a slide in it, of course, 'cause it's a pretty good resource. The nice thing about it, if you install to the cloud, it automatically, if you have a DNS record pointing to it, can register and renew its own SSL certificate using Let's Encrypt. It's kind of nice for getting started, right? And it does renew it as well. All right, next up is Rita. I see people taking pictures, totally fine to do so, but I have the entire slide, the exact one I'm presenting, at the end as a short link. All right, next up is Rita. So Rita is a hunting tool. It's meant to aid, but not replace threat hunters. I've been burned, and I'm sure people in this room have as well, by too many vendors saying, if you buy our shiny blinking light box, you can replace all of your incident responders. We'll just have the red button go, and you'll press the easy button, and then the malware would disappear. And then the red button never lights up, because it turns out they were lying to you the whole time. All right, so this is a force multiplier. I love that term. It's written by John Strand. You may have heard of him, right? And Black Hills Information Security. It's designed to process a lot of data. It does require a fair bit of resources to work with. It's valuable for identifying long-term activity, network trends. There's other parts to it, but the beaconing behavior is so powerful. It's not a replacement for RDS. In fact, it's not using any signatures whatsoever. And I know you've been burned on that by the AI, machine learning, next-gen endpoint virus malware protection with blockchain. It's not a replacement for your IDS. It's not a replacement for your AV. But it's going to find more targeted stuff than any of them will, in all seriousness. It is feeding on Zeek logs, and it's storing the analysis in MongoDB. And I have the install instructions on the slide notes so you can get started really quickly. Again, this is not just a live talk. This is also an outline of what your next few weeks could be. And I guarantee the vast majority of people in this room would find bad in your environment walking through Girth and Rita and JA3. All right. So a one-time analysis option. If you want to get started, capture packets on the internal side of your network border at least 24 hours worth. Analyze them even one time. Any spare box, literally a laptop will do. It's going to be a little slower with a laptop compared to a bigger, beefier box, but let's be honest. Out of your test, dev, and obsoleted server hardware, you have some box with at least 4 or 6 cores and maybe 16 or 32 gigs of RAM. Right? You have something you can chew on this with. So there's also an option for ongoing analysis. Bro and Zeek can be fed constantly, like your span capture, your span port, etc. And it will automatically run and have it feed through into whatever seam of your choice. All right, a hunting tool. As a reminder, this is aiding threat hunters, not replacing them. It's a force multiplier, like a bicycle, right? There's this awesome graph I saw once of the efficiency of different animals in terms of like calories per mile. And it showed, like, I think seagulls were very, very top. And then it had a human way, way, way up. We're not very efficient, especially me. But then we had human with a bicycle, right? The point of us as humanity is we use tools to increase our effectiveness. I don't have powerful claws or sharp teeth, right? We use, like, firearms and knives instead, and spears and such. All right. You broke me for a second. All right, what does Rita do, all right? Rita looks for things like regular timing between outgoing connections or packets, etc. Now, they're being very generous here, because Zeek disagrees with Jay Ham about the idea of an outbound connection, because it will classify things like UDP outgoing periodically as a connection, even though it's connectionless, yeah. But it's still beaconing behavior worthy of further investigation. It does other things as well, like long connection times. Because as we all know, if your connection time lasts longer than 4 hours, you're supposed to call your incident responder, right? No? All right. Exploded DNS analysis is also awesome. That's really, really useful for searching for, well, DNS uses command and control, which is always my favorite example of, if you're not looking for DNS used to C2, you will never see it. If it's being used and you look for it, it is obvious as everything could ever be. Oh my God, is it obvious? Oh my God, is it loud? If you're looking for it. If you're not, it's invisible. All right, basic usage. You read import pointing to your Zeek logs, and you make a new arbitrary database name. If you want to have a human-readable output, so you search through it, -H with Rita show beacons. You can also save the output in CSV format, and that's what you're going to want to do, just to be honest, because then you can wheel and deal things in Excel. A lot of incident response boils down to stupid pivot tables in Excel. A lot of pen testing boils down to, well, Microsoft Word. And I'm sorry, but a lot of management boils down to PowerPoint. All right. So here's a real-world example. Literally a real-world example. We have on the far left the score, the badness score, the beaconing score. I had to black out the source and destination because, of course, this is real information. And for those who look at the slides later, no, it's not a black box over the original unredacted image. I got you, right? So you can sort by things like connections or the outbound bytes, etc. But has anybody seen that graphic on the right there? They say how to draw an owl. Draw 2 circles and then draw the rest of the owl, the bad owl, the owl. Yeah, draw the rest of the owl. And sometimes I've dealt with some software that feels like the instructions you get. Here's 2 circles. Take it from here. You got this. And you're like, wait, I have an Excel file. Wait, no, don't leave me. Come back. Come help. All right. So triaging, building your whitelist is ridiculously important because we have to accept false positives when we look for weird, because weird happens. So here's how to get rid of the normal weird as quickly as possible. Your first pass. Look, it's possible that your workstation is compromised, your workstation image. But let's dive into this here. Image a new workstation or laptop. Your help desk has been through this. You've done this before. This is nothing unusual. Install your regular line of business applications that you already have. Open them up. Open up a web browser. Go to the sites that you commonly use. Leave them open, install Wireshark, and get a capture of 24 hours. Everything you just recorded is at the very least not as worthy of your attention as the other stuff. You found a bunch of beaconing behavior just now, but it's the software you already have installed. It's not worthy of further investigation. Right? So you can import that into Zeek, analyze with Rita, and then whitelist everything that beacons, because that's not interesting to you compared to what happens next. The second pass, right? So you still have a lot to work through. How do you quickly triage this data? My argument, gather that week's worth of capture, the thing that you've already been recommended to do. A span port on a border switch is fine. Now, technically speaking, most span ports are dropping packets every once in a while. But if your budget is 0 or your budget is what can I get done this next few weeks, you're probably not going to be able to wait for a inline traffic duplicator. So just use a span port. It'll be fine. Right? I'd rather get 99% than 0%. All right? So analyze with Zeek using the whitelist from the first pass. Remember that first pass being the workstation. And then sometimes just from the traffic itself, you can be pretty damn sure that it's not malicious. It is beaconing. It's not technically a false positive because it is beaconing behavior, but it's not interesting beaconing behavior, right? Anybody forgotten ping before? You come back days or weeks later, you press Control-C, so it's like 30,000 packets sent. You're like, oh, oops, I'm sorry, 4222. I didn't mean to send you that much traffic, right? So there's other ways to do it. Split cap is an option on the Linux side, but there's also the Linux option is in the slide notes, but there's splitcap.exe for Windows that lets you take that one packet capture and efficiently go through it once and make things like host pairs. So you can find for a given source and destination, it'll make its own packet capture file. So that one, unlike JHAM's 5 GB or many, many more packet capture file, you can actually open in Wireshark, and a lot of this traffic you can rule out just by examining the plain text traffic. Right? Triage is important. Do the easy stuff first. There will be some stuff you can't figure out that way, and that's okay, because sometimes you do need to analyze the actual source application that sent that traffic, and there is a way to do that. Almost all the time I see people using netsh trace is to make an ETL file that they immediately convert to PCAP and open in Wireshark. But there is a huge advantage to netsh trace in the original ETL format. You can trace the source application for each of the traffic. Oh my God, is that useful? Not just this box is beaconing somehow, but instead this particular application that you might be able to investigate further and ask the vendor versus that's called malware.exe or notjake.exe. Should probably check that out, right? So by the way, I've gone through a lot of pain to get this exact netsh trace command working. It's a good one. You can change the path, the trace file, read-nettrace.etl, but for the most part, you're probably going to want this. Just swap out the beaconing IP address. So remember, you have the source IP address phoning home to a beaconing external IP address. That's what read is focusing on. So for each source, you find the box and run this netsh trace command on it, and then analyze it after a short amount of time, an hour or so. This is what the actual cab file looks like. This is what it makes afterwards. It has the ETL file, but a whole bunch of other diagnostics available to you, like the list of processes, the list of network events, operating system information, etc. You're probably mostly going to want to take a look with Microsoft Message Analyzer, reda-nettrace.etl. The default layout of Microsoft Message Analyzer is crap, just going to be honest. So instead, change the layouts to process, name, and conversations, which sounds really useful, and it is. So the new layout will be by process, and then you add a filter right here where that lovely arrow is for the beaconing IP address. And then you see which application is beaconing, and you can investigate from there, knowing the actual application and probably having some idea of what vendor to talk with or figure it out from there, or do memory forensics from there since you already have Girth installed, right? Right? So you can work from there. Questions there? All right. Last thing I want to talk about is JA3. So JA3 is a way to categorize the plain text portions of the SSL handshaking process, which is really, really awesome. We think, oh, it's over HTTPS. There's nothing we can do. It's encrypted, or maybe we have to do SSL man in the middle, SSL interception in order to see this. You don't. There's stuff available before the actual encrypted portion, right? In terms of the back and forth, right? The client says, hello, these are the cipher suites that I support. The server says, hello, these are the cipher suites that I support. And then the server chooses what cipher suite to actually go with. But those list of extensions, those list of cipher suites, the SSL version, those are indicators of what type of tool is doing the SSL connection. It turns out different applications have different lists. PowerShell behaves differently than Internet Explorer, behaves differently than Chrome, behaves differently than underlying .NET, which is really, really valuable. If you have new, unique JA3 client certificates or client fingerprints going out, check those out. That's a very, very flexible type of signature. It's not that's known bad. You may not know what it is, but you can look some of them up. But it's worthy of further investigation. We've never seen this kind of traffic before. We've never seen this SSL client before. Let's figure it out. Oh, it turns out a lot of C2 also uses very, very unique server-side SSL certificate order. Did you know that default, like PowerShell Empire is deprecated, long live Empire, but it uses a very unique list of server-side certificates. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just sort traffic by PowerShell Empire, sort traffic by Cobalt Strike, look for Meterpreter HTTPS handlers, and like, oh, there's the list. We should probably check that out. That's a damn useful indicator, wouldn't you agree? And then, yes, JA3S is the same idea, but for the server side. All right, so that's hitting one step above the domain names, going back to that pyramid of pain. X509, that behavior is artifacts, which are fairly difficult to change. Not impossible, but it's kind of awesome if you catch an attacker because there's fog of war in both directions. The attacker doesn't know what got them caught. If you find them using JA3S, and they set up new infrastructure, new IP, new phishing email, new domain, and you immediately catch them again, they're going to be scratching their head and wondering, how the heck did you find me? I replaced everything. Ah, but use the same infrastructure for your next attack, right? As we do as attackers. So quick start for JA3, install Security Onion. It turns out Zeek and Suricata rather, has support for JA3 out of the box. Point your span traffic, the same one I've talked about for using Rita, at your dedicated network port. Send your Zeek Suricata logs, they both support JA3, to your SIM of choice. Baseline, oh my goodness, baseline, in a similar fashion to Rita. Using a domain joined workstation, see what's normal inside your environment before you look for the exceptions to the rule. Because you already have some known SSL client side and a few known SSL server side to deal with. Baseline what's already in use inside your organization, and then look through the outliers. All right? And by the way, there's ja3er.com, which has this nice, well, in this case, I believe JSON style. SQL map is different than Python request, is different than wget, is different than Slack phoning home. Yes, Slack has its own unique SSL client-side fingerprint. If you don't have it as authorized software in your environment, they've revealed themselves through the artifacts. And frankly, looking for Slack or Dropbox as unique SSL fingerprints, it's not like your shadow IT employees are going to change the SSL handshaking function of Dropbox to evade IT. That's not how shadow IT is working in general. All right? So the point of today's talk, detection engineering is not just something to strive on over months and years. It's also something you can use other people's technology that's freely available. And frankly, I've been through a lot of pain for that Rita section. Take advantage of my pain and don't do that yourself. Right? Use off-the-shelf software, Girth, OS Query, Rita, JA3, Security Onion, Virus Total, and freely shared knowledge. The fact that we have shared language to describe attacker techniques with Attack Matrix is amazing. It's a great resource. Look, I know it's an obligatory slide, but it's an obligatory slide for a damn good reason. Information security is one of the very few fields that, as a regular business practice, shares the secret sauce on things like GitHub. Right? Take advantage of other people's pain and don't go through it yourself. Explore, contribute further. Even when putting this presentation together, I found about the OS Query attack mapping that has over 50% of attack matrix coverage. That's pretty awesome. Now, is it going to be perfect coverage of every technique? No, that's not how coverage works. But is it more than you have? I would bet yes. Right? Perfect is the enemy of good. And perfect is also the enemy of getting started. Analysis paralysis is a thing. Here's my biased opinion on where to get started. Right? So there's the, if I have seen further, just by standing on the shoulders of giants, because other people have made awesome things. My particular thing that I do is find other people's awesome crap and use that. And it works well. Right? Any questions? Let me know. I'm on the Twitters, I'm on email, and yes. Wait, I have to. Photobomb, of course. Available at bit.ly/finding malware. Oh my god, I photobombed everyone. Put that up on Twitter, I'm so excited about that. All right. To repeat that for the recording, the slides are available online at bit.ly/finding malware. It's literally the Google Slides presentation I just used. There's nothing secret, and by the way, there are slide notes, especially in that Rita section, all the way through, and links on things like creating group policy, creating those filters, installing Rita to begin with, has lots and lots of step-by-step instructions to go with as well. All right? Any questions? Yes, Jahim. Am I a nice person? It depends on who I'm dealing with. If it's the attacker and I'm the defender, no, I'm evil. If I'm the attacker and you're the defender, again, I'm evil. If we're on the same side, I'm fairly friendly. I'll share a beer with you. Any other questions? Come on, raise a hand. I got a few minutes left. I got excited. Yes? Yep. Question is, for the recording, if you have to start small, if you have a small staff and very little place to go, in all honesty, starting with Girth, Google Rapid Response, literally deploying it is damn easy. That group policy, that's 2 group policy objects, you install it on some spare VM, and you plug in the pre-built OS queries, and you have a whole lot of coverage. A lot more than, honestly, a lot of big enterprises. If you ask people in the room, right, what percentage of coverage do you think you have for Attack Matrix? The first answer, let's be honest, is I don't know. Because you haven't mapped what you have against the Attack Matrix. Let's just be honest. But if you had to guess, it would not be a very high percentage. Is anyone pretty confident you're double-digit percentage? For the recording, I saw a couple hands that were a little bit wavy. Like, probably. It's 9 to 12%, somewhere in that range. Great question. Any others? Right. Rather, what other questions do we have? Ask me a question. I'll keep talking until they pull me away. Yes? Security onion boxers. Okay. The question is, how do we sell this to upper management? Because I'm getting on my soapbox, which kind of works. Most organizations, a lot of the technical folk know what they want to do. They just don't have the political capital from on high to implement those changes. Right? The point of this is, if you can get permission to install Girth, you can find some bad and say, we need more resources to find more bad because we've been blind to this the whole time. Starting somewhere. And this, I'm not telling you to go rogue and be your own shadow IT, but if you have domain admin rights, you should just link these GPOs and YOLO it. Yeah. Yes, Jay Ham. No, dude, I was just... Props. All right. Just YOLO it is like my tagline for this talk, apparently. What's the next question? I think I saw another hand. Wasn't there a hand up here? Somebody up here has to raise a hand. If a hand goes above a shoulder, I'm going to call. Even if you're picking at your nose, I'm sorry, you have a question now. Yes? The question is, can you integrate Girth with an existing SIM? I believe so, but honestly, I haven't looked into it much, because for most of the organizations I'm dealing with, they have very crappy SIM that they're already writing the line of licensing, Splunk. So they don't want to add more things. So getting value somewhere else. And look, I'm big on single pane of glass. No, I'm not. That's a marketing term only. I'd rather find value no matter how many panes of glass I have to deal with, and do best in breed, to use more marketing terms, even if it's multiple panes of glass. The answer is get more monitors so you can have multiple panes of glass. Yes? The question is, what would I consider a good SIEM or SIM to use? The one that works well for you is the good one. I have no strong opinion on, I like elk, and hunting elk is pretty awesome if you can deploy Sysmon and forward with Windows Event Forwarding for free to a box that then feeds into hunting elk. That's a whole bunch of stuff already there for you. And just to be blunt, and to kind of throw out another, harsh thing against vendors, Sysmon is EDR, and it's free. The D is for detection. Sysmon adds that. The automatically block the bad is going back down to very, very fragile signatures. I'd rather have really good detective controls and very few preventative controls, and Sysmon combined with hunting elk, just to throw out specific actions, is what I'd recommend if you don't have anything currently. Yes? Repeating the question for the recording. Have I looked at using AWS traffic mirroring for threat hunting? No. I know it exists, but I haven't. I have no power here, Gandalf. Next question? Sorry. Yes, right there. All right, repeating for the recording again. The question was, for that initial pass of whitelisting using imaged workstations, what am I actually whitelisting? Essentially, assuming that you don't have a compromised base build, which if you do, you're pretty boned. Assuming that's not compromised, whitelisting everything that comes out and shows up as beaconing behavior is going to give you better bang for the buck for what you look at otherwise. You can do a cursory glance, and you're definitely in a good position to do so if you're curious about something that just shows up really strongly beaconing. Honestly, one of my first times using Rita was for an organization that contracts with rendition infosec. And one of the first things I found was, oh my God, there's a TCP connection that lasted the entire time, the entire week I did this span capture. Oh, it's phoning home to rendition. Like I trace it down to Augusta, Georgia, and like call up Jake or Brendan McCrillis and say, hey, is that you? Yeah? All right, good. And that was easy to rule that out pretty quickly, right? You can't always just find Jake quite so easily. I hear some people have more trouble. Other questions? Right in the feels. All right, we're at 2:44. If there are no further questions, feel free to. Last second. 3, 2, 1. In that case, talk over, and let's get the next people in. Thank you.